Ford's 300 cubic inch inline-six can run for 500,000 miles on nothing but spite and neglect. Seriously. While modern engines are having nervous breakdowns at 150,000 miles, this cast-iron dinosaur just keeps going. But here's what nobody tells you about why it's actually indestructible, and why Ford killed it anyway. Keep watching. The year is 1965. Ford's got a problem. Their trucks are getting bigger, heavier, and hungrier for torque. The small block V8 sound great, sure, but they're thirsty, they're complex, and honestly, they're overkill for what most truck owners actually need. So Ford's engineers did something that sounds insane by today's standards. They made an engine simpler, longer, and somehow better. The 300 inline-six isn't just big, it's comically long. We're talking about a cylinder head that stretches almost 3 feet. Picture trying to fit a baseball bat under your hood. Now picture that baseball bat making 300 pound-feet of torque. That's the 300. And that ridiculous length. That's actually the secret to everything. But before we get into why this thing refuses to die, we need to talk about where it came from. Because the 300 didn't just appear out of nowhere. It's part of a family. A dynasty, really. The Ford inline-six story starts way back in 1906. Yeah. 1906, before World War I, before sliced bread was a thing, Ford was already building straight sixes, and they kept building them, evolving them, perfecting them for almost a century. The 300 specifically traces its bloodline to the Ford 223 cubic inch six, introduced in 1954. That engine was already known for being tough. Farmers loved it. Truck guys loved it. It was simple, reliable, and made decent power for the era. Ford needed more displacement, more torque, more capability, so they took that 223, bored it out, stroked it, and created the 300. The displacement math is actually pretty straightforward. You've got 6 cylinders, each displacing right around 50 cubic inches. Do the multiplication and boom, 300 cubic inches. 4.9 liters if you're metric-minded. But here's where it gets interesting. That displacement is spread across 6 separate combustion chambers arranged in a perfectly straight line. Not a V, not a boxer, just 6 cylinders marching in formation like they're on parade. And that straight line configuration, it's the foundation of everything that makes this engine special. But we'll get to that in a second. First, let's talk about what made its debut so underwhelming that it became legendary. When the 300 launched in 1965, nobody threw a parade. The horsepower? A whopping 150. In 1965, the same year the Corvette was making 425 horsepower. The same year muscle cars were starting to dominate every conversation at every gas station in America. 150 horsepower was, let's be honest, pathetic. But Ford didn't care, because they weren't building this engine for teenage street racers. They were building it for the guy who needed to tow a boat, haul lumber, or keep a farm running. And for that guy, torque is everything. The 300 made 283 pound-feet of torque. That's the number that matters when you're trying to unstick a truck from mud, pull a trailer up a hill, or keep working when everyone else has gone home. And here's the thing about that torque. It showed up low, like really low in the RPM range. Peak torque hit at 2,000 revolutions per minute. That means you barely had to tickle the throttle before this engine was making serious pulling power. Compare that to a modern engine that needs to rev it to 4,000 or 5,000 revolutions per minute to hit peak torque. And you start to understand why truck guys fell in love with it. So what makes this thing so bulletproof? Let's start with the most obvious answer. It's simple. Laughably simple. There's no variable valve timing, no turbochargers, no intercoolers, no direct injection, no computers managing 17 different sensors. Just iron, steel, and basic physics. 1 camshaft, 12 valves, push rods, a carburetor. That's it. When you've only got a handful of moving parts, there's only a handful of things that can break. And when those parts are massively overbuilt, you've got an engine that can survive abuse that would kill anything modern in a week. But the simplicity is just the start. The real magic is in the engineering. Remember that ridiculous length we talked about? That 3-foot-long cylinder head? That's not a design flaw. That's genius. Here's why. In a V8, The cylinders are split into two banks. That means you've got two separate exhaust manifolds, two separate intake runners, and a crankshaft that's getting hammered from multiple angles. Vibration and stress. The inline-six, none of that. Every cylinder is in a straight line, perfectly balanced. When cylinder 1 fires, cylinder 6 is doing the opposite. When cylinder 2 fires, cylinder 5 counters it. It's naturally balanced in a way that a V8 can never be without adding balance shafts and counterweights. That balance means less vibration. Less vibration means less stress on bearings, less wear on seals, less fatigue on components. That adds up to hundreds of thousands of miles. But there's more. The stroke on the 300 is long. Really long. 3.98 inches. For context, that's longer than most modern engines by a significant margin. A long stroke means each piston travels farther up and down in the cylinder. That creates something called leverage. The same way a longer wrench gives you more leverage on a bolt. A longer stroke gives the piston more leverage on the crankshaft. More leverage equals more torque. But there's a trade-off. Long-stroke engines can't rev high. The 300's red line is somewhere around 4,500 revolutions per minute. Push it past that and you're asking for trouble. But again, Ford didn't care. This engine wasn't designed to scream. It was designed to pull. Low-end grunt is where it lives. And that's exactly what trucks need. Now let's talk about the 7 main bearings. Yeah, 7. Most inline-sixes have 4, maybe 5, if the engineers are feeling generous. The 300 has 7. That means the crankshaft is supported at 7 different points along its length. More support means less flex. Less flex means less wear. Less wear means you can run this thing for 500,000 miles, and it'll still have oil pressure. Those 7 bearings are part of what Ford called the 7 main bearing crankshaft design, and it's one of the most over-engineered aspects of the whole engine. It adds weight, it adds cost, but it also adds durability that borders on absurd. Truck guys will tell you stories about 306s with 400,000 miles that have never been opened up. Original gaskets, original seals, still running. The block itself is cast iron, thick cast iron. This isn't some thin-wall aluminum block designed to save weight for fuel economy. This is old-school, heavy, indestructible iron. You could probably drop one off a building and it'd just be annoyed. That mass also helps with heat dissipation. More metal equals more thermal mass equals more stable operating temperatures. And speaking of heat, let's talk about the cooling system. The 300 uses a simple, effective design with large water jackets around each cylinder. Coolant flows evenly through the entire block, keeping temperatures consistent. There are no hot spots, no areas where heat builds up and causes warping or cracking. Just steady, even cooling. Boring. Absolutely. Effective. You have no idea. The cylinder head is also cast iron. One piece. No overhead cams. No variable valve timing. Just a simple wedge-shaped combustion chamber, with one intake valve and one exhaust valve per cylinder. Is it efficient by modern standards? Not even close. But efficiency wasn't the goal. Durability was, and you can't argue with the results. Here's where things get really interesting. The 300's design means it has something called even firing intervals. Every 120 degrees of crankshaft rotation, a cylinder fires, perfectly spaced, perfectly balanced. That creates a smoothness that most V6 engines can't match even with modern technology. It also reduces stress on the entire drivetrain. Your transmission isn't getting hammered by uneven pulses. Your drive shaft isn't dealing with torsional vibrations. Now, you might be wondering about power, because 150 horsepower is, let's face it, weak. Even for 1965. And you'd be right. But here's the thing. The 300 was never about peak horsepower. It was about usable power. That torque curve, it's flat as Kansas. From 1,500 revolutions per minute to 3,500 revolutions per minute, you're basically sitting on full torque the entire time. That means whether you're lugging a heavy load at low speed or cruising at highway RPM, the engine always has power available. No turbo lag, no waiting for VTEC to kick in. Just constant, reliable grunt. And because the engine makes power so low in the rev range, it's barely working most of the time. Think about it. If your peak torque is at 2,000 revolutions per minute and you're cruising at 2,500 revolutions per minute, the engine is basically loafing. It's not stressed, it's not straining, it's just existing. That kind of easy operation is how you rack up ridiculous mileage. But let's address the elephant in the room. If this engine is so great, why did Ford kill it? The 300 was in production from 1965 all the way to 1996. 31 years. That's an eternity in automotive terms. Most engines get replaced every 7 to 10 years. The 300 outlasted entire vehicle platforms. It outlasted trends. It outlasted the muscle car era, the malaise era, the fuel crisis, the rise of imports, and the beginning of the SUV boom. So why did it finally die? 2 words. Fuel economy. By the mid-90s, CAFE standards were tightening. The EPA was cracking down, and the 300, for all its strengths, was not fuel efficient. It couldn't be. The design was fundamentally from another era. Push rods, a carburetor, even firing intervals, and cast iron everything made it durable. But it also made it thirsty compared to newer overhead cam designs with fuel injection and aluminum construction. Ford replaced it with the 4.2-liter V6. It got better fuel economy and fit the modern era better. But ask any old truck guy which engine they'd rather have. And the answer is always the 300, because the V6 couldn't touch the 300's durability. Not even close. Here's the dirty secret about modern engines. They're designed to last just long enough. Maybe 200,000 miles if you're lucky and meticulous about maintenance. After that, you're on borrowed time. Turbochargers fail, timing chains stretch, direct injection systems carbon up, sensors go haywire. The complexity that gives modern engines great power and efficiency also gives them 1,000 ways to fail. The 300 has none of that. It's got a timing gear. Solid, simple, doesn't wear out. No turbocharger to cook itself to death. No computers to glitch. Just metal parts doing mechanical things. When something does eventually wear out, it's cheap to fix. Valve job, couple $100. Bearings? Not much more. Head gasket? You can do it in a weekend with basic tools. And parts availability? Still fantastic. Because Ford made millions of these engines over 3 decades. Junkyards are full of them. Need a water pump? $5 at the pick and pull. Need a cylinder head? They're everywhere. This is an engine you can keep running forever without a trust fund. There's also something to be said about the culture around the 300. It's not a flashy engine. Nobody's making YouTube videos about 1,000 horsepower 300 builds. There are no Instagram accounts dedicated to slammed trucks with polished inline-sixes under the hood. It's not that kind of engine. The people who love the 300 are farmers, ranchers, contractors, and old-school truck enthusiasts who value function over form. These are people who understand that the best tool is the one that works every single time. The 300 is the Zippo lighter of engines, the cast-iron skillet, the Honda Civic, but American and with torque for days. It's not exciting. It's just reliable in a way that feels almost supernatural. There are stories. So many stories. The construction worker who put 600,000 miles on his F-250 with the original engine. The farmer whose 300 ran dry of oil for 20 minutes and survived. The guy who pulled a stuck tractor out of a pond with a 40-year-old F-150, and the engine didn't even complain. These aren't myths. Talk to enough old truck guys, and you'll hear variations of the same theme. The 300 doesn't quit. But let's get technical again for a minute. Because there's another reason this engine is so tough. And it's kind of hilarious. Ford didn't really update it much. Over 31 years of production, the basic design stayed almost identical. Yeah, they added fuel injection in the 80s. They tweaked the camshaft profile a few times. But the fundamental architecture? Unchanged. That sounds like a bad thing. Like Ford got lazy. But it's actually brilliant, because every time an automaker redesigns an engine, they introduce new variables, new potential failure points, new parts that haven't been proven over millions of miles. The 300 didn't have that problem. By 1996, Ford had been building essentially the same engine for over 40 years if you count its predecessors. Every weakness had been found and fixed. Every part had been refined. What you got in 1996 was the end result of 4 decades of iteration. It's the opposite of modern development, where engines get completely redesigned every generation to chase horsepower numbers and fuel economy targets. Sometimes that works. Often it doesn't. How many modern engines have you heard about with catastrophic flaws? Timing chain guides that disintegrate. Piston rings that fail. Turbos that grenades. The 300 didn't have any of that because Ford had already solved those problems in 1975. Now, could you make power with a 300? Sure. The aftermarket figured that out decades ago. Turbochargers, superchargers, head porting, stroker kits. You can build a 300 to make serious power. But that kind of defeats the point. The beauty of the 300 is that it makes enough power for actual work. And it does it forever without drama. Start bolting on forced induction and you're adding complexity. Adding stress. Adding potential failure points. Some guys do it anyway. And honestly, the bottom end can handle it. Remember those 7 main bearings? That overbuilt block? You can push a 300 to 400 horsepower, and it'll survive. But you're also fighting the fundamental design. Long stroke means low RPM capability. Push rod valve train means limited breathing at high RPM. It'll work, but it's not what the horse wants to do. The smarter play is to appreciate what the 300 already is. An unkillable workhorse that makes gobs of torque and never stops running. Need to tow 8,000 pounds? The 300's got you. Need to idle all day running a PTO? No problem. Need to start in minus 20-degree weather after sitting for 6 months? Turn the key. It'll fire right up. There's also something weirdly satisfying about the way a 300 sounds. It's not a V8 rumble. It's not a high-strung 4-cylinder scream. It's a smooth mechanical hum. Almost industrial, but refined. At idle, it's nearly silent. Under load, it has this purposeful growl that says, "I'm working. Leave me alone." It's not a sound that gets your heart racing. It's a sound that makes you trust the machine. And let's talk about throttle response. Because in an era of drive-by-wire throttle and turbo lag, the 300's immediate response feels almost alien. The carburetor opens, air and fuel rush in, and power happens. Right now, no delay, no waiting for a computer to decide how much throttle you actually wanted. Just direct, mechanical response. It's the automotive equivalent of a manual transmission. More work, less sophisticated, but infinitely more connected. The 300 also has this reputation for running poorly and still running. You can have a dead cylinder, a blown head gasket, a worn-out carburetor, and the thing will still start and move the truck. It might sound like a bag of hammers. It might smoke like a coal plant. But it'll run. That kind of tolerance for neglect is unheard of in modern engines. Miss an oil change in a new truck? You might be shopping for a new engine. Miss an oil change in a 300? It'll judge you silently and keep running. Ford's decision to discontinue the 300 in 1996 marked the end of an era. The F-Series trucks moved exclusively to V8 and V6 engines. More power, better economy, more technology, progress, right? Except the people who actually used trucks for work mourned the loss. Because they knew that the new engines, for all their advantages, would never match the 300's longevity. And they were right. How many 4.2-liter V6 engines from the late 90s are still running strong today? Sure. But not like the 300. You can still find 80s-era F-150S, with original 300 engines running around, doing work, completely indifferent to the passage of time. That's the difference between an engine designed to last and an engine designed to meet corporate targets. Here's the part that really gets me. The 300 is proof that sometimes, the old way is actually better. Not more efficient, not more powerful, but better for what matters. Reliability, longevity, simplicity. In a world obsessed with innovation for innovation's sake, the 300 stood still and refused to compromise. And that stubbornness made it legendary. So if you ever get the chance to drive a truck with a 300, take it. Don't expect fireworks. Don't expect to win any races. But pay attention to how it delivers power. How smooth it is. How unfazed it seems by whatever you ask it to do. Then check the odometer. Chances are it's got over 200,000 miles on it. Maybe over 300,000. And it's still running like it just rolled off the line. That's the explosive truth about Ford's 300 inline-six. It's not explosive at all. It's the opposite. It's calm, steady, and relentless. It's an engine that does its job without complaint, without drama, and without end. In an automotive world that's forgotten how to build engines that last, the 300 remains a monument to what's possible when you prioritize durability over everything else. And that's why people still talk about it 30 years after Ford pulled the plug.